The night my perfect escape turned into a frozen nightmare, my trusted security chief revealed he was hunting me for a legacy I never knew I was building. The air in the study was thick with the scent of aged leather and stale ambition. Outside, the evening traffic hummed a low, monotonous lullaby that usually soothed me, but tonight it just grated on my nerves. I traced the outline of the world map tacked above my antique mahogany desk, my finger hovering over the coordinates for that tiny, remote island chain. They were the key to everything I'd spent the last 20 years building towards, the final acquisition that would cement my legacy, or rather, my new legacy, the one I'd forge far away from this suffocating life. My current life, theirs. I looked over at the framed photograph on the corner of the desk. Sarah, radiant in her wedding dress, smiling that genuine, uncomplicated smile she used to have before I started prioritizing spreadsheets over sentiment. And next to her, little Michael, missing his 2 front teeth, holding up a clumsily drawn picture of a rocket ship. They were good people, stable, predictable, everything I was now running from. They wanted comfort, quiet weekends, predictable anniversaries. I wanted the sharp, intoxicating thrill of absolute control, the kind of wealth that didn't just buy luxury, but bought silence from any dissenting voice. I leaned back in my chair, the leather sighing under my weight. The plan was meticulous, down to the minute. I'd already arranged the offshore transfers. The final signature needed to be acquired by the end of the fiscal quarter. In 3 weeks, I would be on a private jet bound for the South Pacific. I had already drafted the letter. It wouldn't be apologetic. Apologies were for the weak. It would be factual, explaining that my needs had changed, that the trajectory of my life required a different course, and that my financial provisions for them were more than generous. Generous enough, I calculated, to keep them comfortable for the rest of their lives, comfortably ignorant of the real me. The silence in the house was the next indicator. Sarah was taking Michael to his late piano lesson, which usually lasted an hour and a half. That gave me exactly 90 minutes to finalize the digital footprint deletion and ensure the paper trail, the real paper trail I kept hidden in the safe behind the Renoir print, was ready for incineration. I pulled the heavy fireproof safe open. The metal clicked with satisfying finality. Inside, stacked neatly, were the documents proving the complex shell game I'd orchestrated over the last decade, the one that funneled millions out of the company and into my personal, untraceable accounts. I picked up the thickest binder, the one labeled Project Phoenix, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline. This was the final act. Soon, I wouldn't be Richard Harrington, dependable husband and CEO. I would be RH, global investor, ghost. Just as I was about to start shredding the preliminary notes, my phone buzzed, a rare, unexpected call from Sarah's cell. I frowned. She was always meticulous about keeping work calls off her personal line. I let it go to voicemail, assuming she'd forgotten her wallet or something equally mundane. But then the phone buzzed again, immediately. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from the home security app, a major breach alert. Front door unlocked, followed by the system instantly going into full lockdown. My blood ran cold. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one knew the code but Sarah and me. I scrambled to check the interior cameras. The feed for the living room was static, replaced by a single, looping error message. Frantically, I opened the camera view for the driveway. The minivan was there, parked exactly where it should be, but Sarah wasn't inside. And the front door, which the alert claimed was unlocked, was visibly shut tight. Something was deeply wrong, and the sinking feeling in my gut told me this had nothing to do with forgotten keys. I grabbed the heavy brass letter opener from my desk, the only thing resembling a weapon, and moved toward the study door, my mind racing through every contingency except the one that made my breath hitch. What if they weren't the ones in danger? What if someone had figured out my secret, and they were using my family as leverage to get to me before I could vanish? I reached the hallway, the expensive Persian rug muffling my frantic footsteps, and froze. A sound drifted down the staircase from the second floor, near the master bedroom where Sarah usually kept her jewelry and my emergency passport duplicates. It wasn't a crash or a shout. It was a slow, deliberate, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. like something heavy being dragged across the hardwood floor directly above me. The rhythmic tapping morphed into a scraping sound, a dry, uneven drag that suggested weight and reluctance. My grip tightened on the letter opener until the brass edge bit painfully into my palm. This wasn't a robbery. Robbers were loud, clumsy, or brutally efficient. They didn't stage background noise like a cheap thriller score. This felt personal, targeted, and terrifyingly intimate. They knew where I was. They knew who I cared about, or at least who I pretended to care about. I pressed myself against the cool plaster of the wall beside the staircase, straining my ears. The front door had been breached. The security system was compromised, yet the rest of the house remained unnervingly quiet. The house was too large, too full of shadows and heavy antique furniture to be truly silent, but this absence of expected chaos was deafening. My first instinct, the CEO instinct, was to assess and neutralize the threat from a position of control. I pulled out my phone again, my thumb hovering over the speed dial for my security consultant, Marcus. Marcus specialized in discreet extraction and hostile corporate cleanups. He was paid exorbitant retainer fees precisely for situations like this. But calling him meant admitting the failure of my entire escape plan. It meant bringing the outside world crashing into the meticulously constructed fortress I was about to abandon. If I called Marcus, he would secure the house, find Sarah and Michael, and I would be stuck in this collapsing facade, unable to leave. I hesitated, listening again. The tapping had stopped. Now there was only a faint, wet sound, like someone breathing too close to a sensitive microphone. I made a decision born of desperation, not strategy. If the threat was in the master bedroom, I needed eyes on it before I committed to calling in professional muscle. I moved away from the staircase, deciding to loop around through the kitchen and use the service stairs, a narrow, rarely used route behind the pantry that opened near the second-floor landing, just outside Michael's room. The kitchen was a sterile, brightly lit testament to Sarah's taste for modern efficiency, completely at odds with the dark wood and old-money feel of the rest of the house. I moved quickly across the polished marble floor, the soles of my expensive leather shoes making almost no sound. I slid open the narrow door to the pantry, revealing the steep, dark wood of the service stairs. As I began my ascent, the air grew noticeably colder. The house was usually warm, regulated by a complex climate control system I'd personally overseen. Up here, the cold felt damp, unnatural. I reached the top landing, slipping out beside the linen closet. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by the emergency battery backup lights, casting long, unsettling shadows. The door to the master bedroom, which faced the back garden, was slightly ajar. Not forced, just open, as if someone had paused there for a moment before continuing. I crept forward, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could see into the room now. The heavy drapes were still drawn, plunging the room into near-total darkness, save for the faint sliver of light escaping from the cracked doorway. I could smell it now, a sharp, metallic scent, unmistakable even over the lingering perfume scent I associated with Sarah. Blood. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges protesting with a low, drawn-out groan that seemed to echo down the empty halls. My eyes adjusted. The room was a disaster zone. The antique vanity mirror was smashed, the shards scattered like black diamonds across the rug. Dresser drawers were pulled out, their contents, mostly Sarah's silk scarves and lingerie, tossed everywhere. But it was the center of the room that stole my breath. The heavy four-poster bed frame had been violently disturbed, the expensive duvet ripped halfway off, and there, sprawled awkwardly half on the mattress and half on the floor, was Michael's favorite stuffed rhinoceros, Barnaby. The toy was soaked through, dark crimson staining its gray, familiar hide. My breath hitched, and a strangled cry almost escaped. Michael. Where was Michael? I stumbled forward, kicking aside a silk dressing gown, reaching for Barnaby, needing to touch something familiar in this carnage. As my fingers brushed the wet fabric, a low, gravelly voice spoke from the corner of the room, a voice that sounded like gravel churning in an industrial mixer. "Looking for your boy, Richard?" I spun around, the letter opener uselessly raised. Standing in the deep shadow cast by the walk-in closet door was a figure. Tall, broad, wearing dark, bulky clothing that looked industrial, not criminal. The face was obscured by the shadow, but the outline was unsettlingly familiar, the silhouette of a very large man, and in his hands, held loosely by the leg, dangling upside down, was Sarah. Her eyes were wide open, vacant, staring directly at me. She was noisy, the figure rumbled, tilting his head slightly. Had to quiet her down before she woke the little one. Now about those offshore accounts you're so eager to liquidate. He took a single, heavy step forward, and the emergency light caught the reflection in his hand. Not a knife, but something heavy, blunt, and stained dark brown. And then the figure smiled, a chillingly wide, predatory gesture that revealed too many teeth in the gloom, and I finally recognized the jawline, the scar above the left eyebrow, the sheer, terrifying familiarity of the brute standing over my wife. He wasn't a hired thug. He was my estranged older brother, Thomas, the black sheep I'd paid off a decade ago to disappear after he'd nearly bankrupted the family business. And he was holding a familiar, heavy tire iron, the one Dad kept in the trunk of his classic car, the car Thomas had totaled 30 years ago. Thomas. The word echoed in the sterile silence of the bedroom, a sound so incongruous with my meticulously planned exit strategy that it felt like a glitch in reality. Thomas, the failed gambler, the reckless brute I'd bought out of my life with a settlement large enough to keep him drunk and distant for the better part of a decade. He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't know about this house, this room, or the letter opener I was grasping like a child's toy. How? I managed to croak out, the sound rough, unused. The sight of Sarah, limp, her vibrant red hair stark against the dark wood floor, paralyzed me more effectively than any threat. Thomas laughed, a harsh, hacking sound that confirmed the dark intelligence behind his eyes. How? Richard, you always forget the foundational principles. You leave loose ends. You buy silence, but silence rusts, eventually. He adjusted his grip on the tire iron, casually swinging Sarah's inert body a few inches. The sickening thud of her shoulder hitting the bedside table was a sound that bypassed my ears and burrowed directly into my nervous system. "Where is Michael?" I demanded, trying to inject some authority into my voice, though my legs were trembling violently. The escape plan, the millions, the whole glittering future, it all evaporated in the face of this very real, very tangible horror. Thomas looked toward the door leading to Michael's room, a playful malice twisting his features. "Oh, the little pilot? He's having a nice nap, very deep. I made sure of it." He took another deliberate step, pulling me further into the spotlight of my own failure. Funny, isn't it? You build this entire fortress of lies, planning to jump ship with your dirty money, and who shows up to collect the collateral? The brother you tried to erase. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Thomas had never been subtle. He didn't have the finesse for corporate espionage. This felt too organized, too coordinated with my impending departure. "This isn't you, Thomas. You wouldn't know how to track me this well. Who hired you?" Thomas stopped moving, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his face before it hardened back into stone. "Hired? Richard, you wound me. I'm not working for anyone. I'm collecting what's mine." He gestured vaguely around the ransacked room. "This whole life you built, the respectable facade, the good wife, the golden boy son, it was all built on the foundation of what I dug out of the dirt with Dad. You just learned how to polish the brass while I was stuck in the engine room." He swung the tire iron slightly, and this time, the movement was faster, less playful. He wasn't just talking, he was demonstrating. The metal whistled through the air, aiming for my head. I reacted purely on instinct, the same animalistic reflex that had gotten me out of a few dicey alleyways years before I discovered high finance. I dropped low, pivoting away from the blow, the air displaced by the heavy iron stinging my cheek. I used the momentum of my dodge to lunge forward, not toward Thomas, but toward the doorway to Michael's room. If Thomas had administered a sedative, I needed to check on my son, secure him, and use him as a shield if necessary. A repulsive thought, but survival trumped morality now. "Wrong move, Dickie," Thomas snarled, recovering instantly. He didn't pursue me directly. Instead, he used Sarah's body as an anchor, quickly yanking her upright by her arm until she was standing awkwardly, leaning against him, a horrifying, broken puppet. "Stop!" I yelled, skidding to a halt just at the threshold of Michael's room, my heart lodged in my throat. "Leave her alone!" Thomas pulled the tire iron back and placed the sharp end lightly against the side of Sarah's neck, right near her carotid artery. "You want to play hero? Fine. You move one step into that room, and I rearrange your wife's internal plumbing. I'm not looking for a fight, Richard. I'm looking for the access codes to that safe you were just admiring. The one with the real papers. The ones that prove you didn't just inherit the company, you bled it dry." He knew about the safe. He knew about Project Phoenix. This wasn't just Thomas seeking revenge. This was Thomas operating with intelligence that surpassed his known capabilities. Had he been watching me all along, waiting for the moment I was most vulnerable, right before I disappeared? "The codes are on my desk," I lied weakly, stalling for time. "In the study. Just let her go, and I'll get them." Thomas smiled that awful, wide smile again, his eyes glinting in the low light. "Nice try, but I'm not stupid enough to let the golden goose walk away from the coop. I saw you near the safe earlier. I know they're locked in your head, or maybe written down somewhere close. Tell you what, I'll give you an easier choice. You can walk over here, unlock the safe, and we can split the proceeds 50-50. Or," he paused, pressing the tire iron fractionally harder into Sarah's neck, eliciting a faint, shuddering moan from her lips, "you can watch me explain to your son exactly why his father wasn't just leaving, but why he was running from the consequences of destroying every good thing he touched." As he spoke, Thomas subtly shifted his weight, easing the pressure on Sarah's neck just enough to allow her head to tilt slightly backward. In that brief, terrible moment of loosened tension, I saw it, a tiny, almost invisible scratch mark just below her hairline, the kind of mark you get from a poorly secured seatbelt in a sudden stop. Sarah wasn't just unconscious, she was already gone. My initial fear had been misplaced. Thomas hadn't just silenced her, he had executed her, and he was using her corpse as a bargaining chip. Grief, raw and devastating, suddenly channeled itself into a white-hot rage I hadn't known I possessed. The meticulous planner vanished. All that remained was the brother who had once broken a neighborhood bully's arm over a stolen bicycle. I didn't look at Sarah. I looked at the tire iron, at Thomas's exposed throat, and at the crack in the door leading to Michael. I launched myself across the remaining feet, not toward the safe, but directly at Thomas, roaring my brother's name. "Thomas!" He reacted with surprising speed for a man controlling a dead weight, shoving Sarah's body hard into my path as a barricade, while simultaneously swinging the tire iron in a wide, lethal arc meant to cleave my shoulder from my body. I twisted, the iron whistling past my ear, but the impact of hitting Sarah's already damaged body sent us both sprawling onto the shredded sheets. We wrestled on the ruined bed, the springs screaming under the violence. I managed to hook my leg around his, sending us both crashing to the floor. The tire iron skittered away, sliding under the mahogany dresser. I pinned his arms, scrambling to gain leverage, ready to start pummeling until he stopped breathing. But as I looked down into his face, inches from mine, I saw something worse than rage or greed reflected in his eyes. I saw fear, a genuine, stark terror that had nothing to do with me. "It's not me, Richard, you idiot," he gasped, struggling wildly against my superior hold. "I didn't know they were going to keep him. I just took the money and ran. You think I wanted this? They said they just needed leverage until you showed up. They're not Thomas's men, Richard, they're—" Before he could finish the sentence, before he could name the shadowy organization that had apparently co-opted his predictable, petty revenge plot, the bedroom door swung inward with impossible force, slamming against the wall. Standing there, silhouetted against the dim hall light, was not one figure, but three. They were dressed identically in dark tactical gear, their faces obscured by featureless black balaclavas, and they were all holding silenced automatic weapons pointed directly at my head and the head of my struggling brother. The leading figure didn't speak. He just raised a gloved hand, signaling his companions to halt their approach. He took a slow, measured step into the room, his boot crunching softly on the glass shards from the vanity mirror. He walked directly past my horrified gaze, past the lifeless form of Sarah, and stopped only when he reached the door to Michael's room. He didn't even glance at the little boy's door handle. Instead, he reached up slowly, deliberately, and pulled the small, silver earring from his left earlobe, dropping it onto the thick carpet with a faint tink. He finally looked at me, and beneath the black fabric of the balaclava, I could hear the slow, steady sound of an old, familiar ringtone, playing softly from a device hidden somewhere on his tactical vest. The exact, obscure jingle I had programmed my burner phone to play, the one I had hidden in the safe I was supposed to unlock for Thomas. "Mr. Harrington," the figure said, his voice distorted and synthesized through the masked speaker, yet undeniably possessing the precise, clipped cadence of my head of corporate security, Mr. Vance. "I believe you missed your flight." Vance. My unflappable, hyper-competent head of security, the man who had personally vetted the security systems for my new Pacific Island retreat, the man I trusted implicitly with the physical safety of my entire operation. And he was standing here, not as my protector, but as the commander of an execution squad, moments after my own brother had confirmed that someone else was controlling the collateral. The synthesized voice, Vance's voice, crackled with chilling professionalism. "We apologize for the rough introduction, sir, but given your recent attempts to liquidate assets and terminate communication lines, we felt immediate physical relocation was necessary." I stared, my mind struggling to reconcile the reality. Vance hadn't just betrayed me. He had clearly been running a parallel, higher-stakes operation against me, using my trusted brother as a sacrificial pawn to lure me into a trap. Thomas, realizing the true nature of the game he'd stumbled into, stopped fighting. He went utterly slack beneath me, his eyes wide, fixed on Vance as if trying to find an explanation in the black void of the mask. "Relocation?" I managed, forcing myself to remain pinned, knowing any sudden move meant 3 suppressed rounds ending the matter instantly. "Vance, what the hell are you talking about? I am the company. You work for me." Vance tilted his head in a gesture unsettlingly reminiscent of Thomas's mocking one moments before. "Did you really believe that, Richard? That a man of your unique talents required a mundane corporate structure? We've been cultivating you for years. The acquisition target, the shell corporations, the offshore maneuvers. It was all part of the infrastructure build-out. You thought you were fleeing the system. You were merely being pulled into the secure facility." He gestured with the muzzle of his weapon toward the closed door of Michael's room. "The boy is fine, as promised, sedated but physically unharmed. He's the priority asset, after all. We can't have the heir looking distressed when we present him to the new board." The mention of Michael being extracted as an asset snapped something fundamental inside me. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about ownership, about the theft of the only future I cared about, even if I hadn't fully appreciated it until now. "You touch him, Vance, and I swear I will burn every single one of those shell companies to the ground with your name on the deeds," I spat, ignoring the immediate threat from the weapons pointed at my chest. Vance let out a sound that might have been a sigh through the modulator. Richard, always the transactional threat. You see, that's where you underestimated the real structure. The accounts you thought you were emptying, they were the bait. The real legacy, the one you were supposed to secure for us, was the pharmaceutical research you've been burying for the last 5 years, the one that requires absolute discretion and untraceable funding. You were supposed to deliver that IP cleanly. Instead, you got greedy and tried to run a double cross. He stepped closer, the muzzle of his weapon now inches from my forehead. Thomas, still underneath me, whimpered softly. "Now, we expedite the transition. Your estranged brother was useful for one thing, confirming you were home when you should have been boarding a flight to Pago Pago. For that, he gets a quick end. You, however, get the grand tour." Vance stepped back slightly, nodding to the operative immediately behind him, a squat man whose breathing was unnaturally labored, even through the suppression gear. "Execute Thomas. Gently if you must, but make it quick. Then secure Richard. We need him lucid for the debriefing and the final signature transfer." The squat operative moved forward, retrieving the tire iron from under the dresser without ever taking his eyes off me. He didn't hesitate. He brought the heavy iron down onto Thomas's skull in a sickening, wet thud. The struggling stopped instantly. The silence in the room returned, heavy and absolute, broken only by the faint, tinny sound of that obscure ringtone still emanating from Vance's vest. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The image of my brother dying, an unwitting pawn in a game I didn't even know existed, was an ice bath over my soul. Vance turned toward the door to Michael's room, his synthesized voice gaining an edge of anticipation. "We're moving to the secondary extraction point now. The safe can wait until we have better environmental controls. Lead the way." The two remaining masked figures moved with practiced military precision, positioning themselves on either side of the doorway. Vance took one last look at me, his synthesized tone softening into something almost parental. "Don't worry, Richard. We value the asset. We'll ensure the transition is seamless for the young Mr. Harrington. After all," he paused, his gaze flicking to the door, "who else is going to inherit the work?" And then Vance pushed open the door to Michael's room, the sliver of light disappearing as the black-clad figures stepped across the threshold, closing the door softly behind them. The synthesized voice was gone. The ringtone stopped. There was only the sound of the three men inside the room with my son, and the awful, crushing silence echoing from the hallway as I remained pinned to the floor next to the corpse of my brother, completely helpless, waiting for the sound of the next command or the inevitable final scream. The silence emanating from Michael's room was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a vacuum, sucking the air, the hope, and the last remnants of my calculated composure right out of the room. I stared at the closed door, the wood seeming impossibly thick, an insurmountable barrier between me and the only person left I truly needed to protect. My hands were slick with sweat, uselessly gripping the edge of the ruined duvet. I was a CEO, a strategist, a master manipulator of markets, and in this moment, I was less than nothing. Then, a sound. Not a scream, but a low, almost imperceptible click. It was the sound of a small, metallic object being placed carefully onto a wooden surface. It was the sound of a safety being clicked off. I looked desperately at Thomas's body, still, dark, a messy consequence of a plot far larger than his small-time greed. Then I looked at Vance. He was still standing near the doorway, waiting, radiating supreme control. He hadn't even bothered to check on the scene inside Michael's room. He knew what his men were doing. It was the click that broke me. It wasn't a threat. It was an announcement, a final, deliberate act before the main event, and it triggered something visceral in my memory, a survival mechanism buried so deep I thought it had been incinerated with my old life. Vance's mistake. The one thing he hadn't accounted for in his thorough security assessment. I always had a failsafe for my failsafe. 3 weeks ago, when I was finalizing the plans for the real escape, the one Vance didn't know about, the one planned against Vance and his shadowy benefactors, I had planted one last piece of hardware. Not in the safe, but in the one place I knew Vance would never look twice, inside Michael's beloved, custom-built gaming rig, disguised as a highly advanced, custom cooling fan. It wasn't a bomb. It was a highly directional, low-frequency sonic disruptor designed to overload unsecured voice recognition systems within a small radius. It was only ever meant to work once, activated remotely to wipe any sensitive data recordings I feared Vance might have planted in my study. I realized the click must have been Vance's men activating a recording device, perhaps confirming Michael's location for their supervisors. I looked down at my own phone, the one still resting on the floor near the crumpled body of my wife. It was the cheap disposable burner I'd been using for the final contact with my real extraction team. the team that wasn't supposed to land for another 48 hours. My fingers clawed for it. If Vance's men were using voice recognition, I needed to overload the local frequency now, before they could transmit their confirmation, before they could secure Michael. Ignoring the 3 guns pointed at my head, I snatched the burner phone. My thumb smashed the single, pre-programmed contact labeled D-Day. I didn't even wait for it to dial. I slammed the phone onto the floor, right next to the tire iron, and pressed the emergency call button repeatedly, praying the proximity to the sonic weapon would amplify the output. For a split second, nothing happened. Vance just stared, an expression of mild annoyance crossing his concealed features. Then the air shimmered. It wasn't sound, it was vibration, a deep, painful thrumming that resonated through my bones. The synthesized distortion speaker on Vance's mask instantly devolved into a screeching electronic howl, high-pitched and agonizing. Vance clapped his gloved hands over his helmet, staggering backward, his 2 backup men freezing as their own internal comms dissolved into static feedback. The 3 masked figures inside Michael's room reacted instantly. The heavy thrumming overloaded their sensitive gear, causing them to drop their weapons and clutch their heads, a low moan replacing any sense of military discipline. This was my window. It wouldn't last more than 10 seconds. I didn't go for the guns. I went for the door. I launched myself off the floor, using the momentum to shoulder check the thick oak door, blowing it open wider. I burst into Michael's room, a tornado of rage and adrenaline, ignoring the agonizing pressure building in my own skull from the sonic wave. The scene inside was chaos, but not the carnage I feared. Michael was, indeed, asleep in his bed, an injection site barely visible on his arm. But he was breathing evenly. The 3 operatives were momentarily stunned, their weapons lying where they had dropped them. The first operative was recovering fastest. He lunged for his rifle. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, Michael's bronze trophy for the state science fair, and swung it with all my might, connecting squarely with the operative's helmet. He dropped like a stone. The second operative was already reaching for his sidearm. I kicked out, catching him hard behind the knee, dropping him. Vance's voice, struggling to pierce the electronic feedback, was a garbled mess from the hall. "Secure asset. I didn't have time for Vance. I scooped Michael into my arms. He felt so light, so vulnerable. I turned toward the third operative, who was now aiming his rifle again, his training overriding the feedback. As he sighted down the barrel, aiming for my chest, the final element of my failsafe activated. From the gaming rig beneath Michael's desk, the specialized cooling fan ejected with explosive force, tearing through the drywall behind it. It wasn't a projectile. It was a chemical dispersal charge. A cloud of thick, fast-acting cryogenic vapor flooded the small room, instantly frosting the air. The operative firing the rifle inhaled sharply, and the sound of his breath catching turned into a choked, frozen gasp. His movements ceased mid-motion. The vapor was designed to instantly freeze neural pathways and respiratory function without leaving permanent external damage, effectively putting the targets into suspended animation. I clamped Michael tightly against my chest, angling my body away from the worst of the cloud. But the cold seeped through my suit instantly. I retreated through the door into the hallway, pulling the frozen operative's rifle up and pointing it back at Vance, who was still staggering, trying to clear the static in his ears. "It ends now, Vance," I managed to gasp, the cold burning my lungs. Vance finally cleared his comms enough to hear me. He stabilized, raising his hands slightly, an acknowledgement of defeat mixed with grudging respect. "You always were too paranoid, Richard. You never trusted the structure." "I trust what I build," I retorted, tightening my grip on my son. "And I just built a very cold tomb for your entire extraction team." I didn't shoot Vance. I didn't need to. The true extraction team, the ones I'd hired 3 weeks ago, the legitimate operators who knew nothing of Vance's internal coup, would be arriving shortly, responding to the emergency override signal I'd sent on the burner phone when I dialed D-Day. They would be arriving to find a scene of corporate espionage gone fatally wrong, with Vance and his masked men frozen solid in the manor, holding weapons next to the deceased Thomas and the conveniently dead Sarah. I dragged Michael and the rifle down the stairs, past the bodies, toward the back patio doors, which offered the clearest path to the heavily wooded acreage. I didn't look back at Sarah. I couldn't. The weight of my initial betrayal, the years of lies, had finally come due, and the price had been paid by everyone but me. As I broke through the patio doors into the relative warmth of the night air, clutching my son, I heard the distant, unmistakable sound of a professional extraction helicopter approaching, the one that wasn't Vance's. I started running toward the tree line, the rifle heavy in my hand, finally free of the empire I'd built, but now facing the terrifying reality that the riches I sought weren't wealth, but survival. And I was running with the only true asset left, the boy who, for now, was still breathing.